Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today on the global state of scams and the power of nonprofits. So as more people are joining our session, I'm going to give a little peek into what we're going to be discussing. At the end of the session, I'm going to leave a few minutes for Q&A, but if we don't get to it, please send questions and we can get responses over to everyone afterwards. Additionally, I encourage everybody in the audience to take a look at the work of our speakers and the organizations, that they're publishing their work as well. And we'll be sure to include links and reports mentioned that we discussed today and so on. So let's dive in. As e-commerce continues to grow and our partners and payments develop new and interesting tools, so do the opportunities for bad actors. We've heard it from our previous two speakers. We're going to continue hearing it throughout the sessions today. To me, it's like when a company expands too quickly without crossing all the T's and dotting the I's. The attack surface of our industry has expanded so rapidly since the COVID-19 induced boom. Criminals can more easily spot gaps and loopholes to exploit consumers and businesses alike. And financial crime has been and continues to be a global problem, and AI has supercharged everything. As Erin West mentioned in her session, pig butchering is exploding. We're seeing that video and voice mimicking is almost perfect. ATOs are at an all-time high, and offering fraud as a service has never been easier. Even our favorite scammers out of West Africa, they've opened online schools to teach others how to make a career out of scamming. Gone are the days that our Nigerian princes are asking you for money. Now you're being tricked into thinking it's a close relative or friend pleading for financial help. And despite all of the wonders that AI has brought, it's not just about throwing tech at the problem. It takes industry knowledge, expertise, and collaborative efforts across different sectors to stay ahead of criminals. And the purpose of this session is not to scare you, it's not to scare anybody, but for you in the audience to question what seems reasonable, understand where you sit in the value chain of disruption, and spread awareness about the resources available to you. And part of that is where nonprofits come in and how today's speakers spend their time. Professor Yori Abraham is the managing director of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance, as well as scamadvisor.com. Gary is the director of threat intelligence for Dark Tower and is also a professor in Birmingham, Alabama. These two people play a huge role, whether it is raising awareness, supporting victims. I see you shaking your head there, you do. Or working behind the scenes with financial institutions, regulators, and enforcement. Nonprofit organizations help shape the policies that are essential into disrupting criminals and their broader networks. So today we're going to explore how these awesome humans and the organizations they lead are driving innovative strategies to detect and disrupt illicit activity. Gary, if we could start with you, can we get a little intro on who you are, the orgs you represent, and just kind of why this interests you? Why did you get into this space?
Sure. So I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, as was mentioned, but I didn't start in academia. I actually worked in industry for about 15 years. And then in 2000, I started volunteering with the FBI. By 2001, I had been given a top secret clearance and access to their case system. And my job for them was connecting dots. I'm a data miner with 15 years of network security experience at that point, and we were able to do some interesting things. But what I realized was I had an opportunity to do something different to be a force multiplier. So if I kept working for them 20 hours a week, I would be able to contribute 20 hours a week. But by going to the university, I've had over 2,500 students come through my program, but I've also had over almost 700 now that worked in my lab or at Dark Tower who spent 20 hours a week while they were students working for real world companies on real world problems. So just the time they worked in my labs, they contributed 1.5 million hours of assistance. But after they get out, they're putting in over 1 million hours every year. And every time we have another 100 graduates, that grows that number by 200,000 man hours a year that can be, well, that I'm very proud to have been part of. So our mission is really to get more qualified people out into the workforce, but also to change that educational experience for the students by giving them the opportunity to work on these real world problems. I say that we have a different model of academic partnership. A lot of people say they have an academic industry partnership, But when what we learn by working for real organizations comes back to the classroom and modifies a curriculum, so our graduates are always being taught what the leading expertise in the field has shared with us.
An academic through and through. I love it. I'm going to pass the question over to Jorg as well. If you could let us know a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
Organization.
I'm briefly presenting my screen, just double checking. Is this working?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So the mission of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance is to protect consumers worldwide from scams. And as you know, it's getting a big problem. I think also Aaron West gave an excellent presentation. We do a survey every year amongst 50,000 plus consumers. And we ask them the question, have you been approached by a scammer in the last 12 months? What happened? Were you scammed? Did you lose money? And I mean, it's incredible. I think scams are one of the most underestimated crimes we see across the globe, and fraud. Because based on our survey amongst 50,000 consumers, we estimate that globally more than $1 trillion has been lost in scams last year. And it's hitting 25% of the population. And the reason why this number sounds so absurd to us in the Western world, we're not being scammed that much. The number of people losing money actually in developing nations like Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, Kenya, which is incredible, but also Southeast Asia, is way, way higher than in Europe. I live in the Netherlands, or in the USA or Canada. So that's the reason why these figures sound very high, but actually I don't think they're really that high. Well, they are very high, but it's I think actually a realistic number.
Well, and what
Sorry,
I love
Gary, please,
about
yes.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. No, what I was going to say is what I love about that. I've always taken this approach that I say is it's back from the total quality management movement. You have to measure before you know where to apply your resources, and you should be applying your resources to the area that has the greatest problem. But we don't have good numbers. And the IC3.gov numbers are the best numbers we have in the US, but your approach has given us numbers we can use to tell that story on a global basis. And for that reason alone, I love what you're doing there.
Thank you very much, Gary. And I think one of the things is, I mean, in the US, you have several places where you can report scams. So you have pretty good numbers. And also in the UK and Singapore, we see that there a lot of good data is collected. In many countries, if you go to the police and you say, hey, I want to report a fraud or a scam, they say, well, you gave them the money, it's not a crime, or sorry, we have other stuff to do. One of my biggest concern is that now online scams have become the number one or number two most reported kind of crime to law enforcement already, while it's also one of the most underreported kinds of crime. In the United Kingdom, 38% of all crime reported now to law enforcement is related to fraud, mainly online fraud scams. In Singapore, where I was 2 weeks ago, to my huge surprise, the law enforcement told me that 70% of what's reported to the Singapore police is related to online scams. And that's because they're a very rich country, speaking English, and are basically surrounded by several countries which are unfortunately quite active in scams, as Aaron was also presenting. And we see specialization, and it was also discussed by the previous speakers, that we see certain villages within countries specializing in scams. I mean, everybody knows about Nigeria and certain villages being very good at the advanced fee scams. But we see in Israel, unfortunately, 2 companies seem to specialize in helping victims recover their money. It's not happening. And in my own country, the Netherlands, we unfortunately have a very good reputation for bulletproof hosting, meaning it's very difficult to take down a website in the Netherlands due to our laws on freedom of speech. So we are really, as Aaron was saying, we are really in a dire situation because the number of online crime is really growing very rapidly. And according to the World Economic Forum, only 0.05% of the cyber criminals are put behind bars. And with that, I will give it back to Maya. Maya, would you like to take over again?
Yeah, I would. Well, you mentioned so many things that I really, really would love to touch on during our session. I want to talk about, what you mentioned about the Netherlands and the bulletproof hosting. I would really like to discuss that, as well as the global impact and different zones that we can focus on. But I'm going to first talk about, I would like to ask a little bit about the idea of disruption from where you guys sit in your orgs. So Gary, going back on the point that you made about understanding these figures and where the problem actually sits and where and how to apply pressure. So from your experience, nonprofits can be watchdogs, they can be advocates, but in terms of taking an active role in disruption and partnering with law enforcement, what are the challenges that you guys are seeing of like where to apply pressure, the types of pushback you might get from those agencies, or even putting your own, org's members at risk?
Well, I think that I would start by saying we have some unique skills outside of law enforcement. I think of the Liam Neeson quote, where he says, I have a particular set of skills, and he says, I will find you and I will help the victims do a qualified law enforcement report. And what we mean by that is if we can get the data that has been historically held only by law enforcement, we have so many techniques that we've developed over the years on how to link together cases, that connecting the dots is more sophisticated than what the average law enforcement person is able to do. And I'll give one quick example of that. We had a case recently that my friend Adrian Cheek and I looked at. The case talked about 3 websites that identified that they said were linked together. So they went to ic3.gov and they searched for those 3 domain names and they found 11 victims. Well, Adrian and I, in roughly one afternoon, found another 1,000 domains that were tied to the same program, of which 280 of them were still live. And by tracing, we joined hundreds of those programs, learned their crypto addresses, traced them on the blockchain, and watched $28 million go to 2 Binance addresses in an afternoon. But they searched for 3 domains because that's what they know. The problem is that those victim complaint data becomes the property of law enforcement, and they aren't allowed to give it to people like us who actually know what to do with that data. So we have been looking at the domain problem, and historically we spent a lot of time on email-based crimes, and so we've patented things about phishing and created an anti-phishing company and sold it to Cofense. But the things we learned about domain takedowns don't work in this space. When we report to a registrar, they're like, is it malware? Is it phishing? Is it trademark or copyright? If it's not one of those things, we're not responsible. I'm like, go back and read your registrar agreement. It says you will take prompt action when illegal activity is reported. But somehow the industry has decided it's malware, phishing, copyright. That's it. So what happens? They then push my complaint to the criminal. And I've been in positions in the past to see the complaint data, to see the results of search warrants. And we see the law enforcement complaints and the people like me complaints going directly into the criminal's inbox. They know my name, my telephone number, my organization, and what I said they did. And that's come back to hit us in different ways. It's almost a safety factor for some of our teams that do this type of work, because we know that the registrars and the hosting companies are going to absolve themselves of their contractual responsibilities and give the complaint data directly to the criminals. They say our customer, but the customer is the criminal in many of these cases.
Is there any kind of response from enforcement in terms of putting your personal self and the people that sit within your org at risk, like them transferring that information back? Like, what has their response been?
From law enforcement?
Or from I mean, if
From
you
the
can report
criminals,
to anybody, I mean, obviously the criminals are like, great, now I know
yeah,
who to go
we
after,
get
but-
attacked. We get attacked. People trying to take over my accounts, taking over my domains, DDoSing properties that I maintain online. I've been under one of the hardest DDoSes I've ever experienced for several months now, right after we reported about 170 domains that were related to a Chinese organized crime group. And most of those attacks are coming from China. You know, it's unfortunate. It's a side effect of the business, I guess.
No, I get that.
But the lack.
It's an
Go ahead,
awful reality.
Go ahead, yeah.
I unfortunately had the same experience as Gary. I mean, for the record, I think the Dutch police are great guys, but within their power, we're being threatened a lot. And also, once I was threatened with, okay, we know what your son's name is, we know where he's going to school, and we will pick him up. That's really not nice if you hear that as a parent. And I reported it to the police, and they said, well, we cannot do anything unless they're standing in front of your door with a gun, and then you can call us. It's a very unfortunate situation, but yeah, I think Gary is doing great stuff, and we need to continue that.
I think the big idea I take away from that is not all heroes wear capes. You guys are really doing important work, and the fact that you're getting this kind of response from the criminals means that you're really hitting them. So I really.
Yeah, we
like,
consider
bravo.
a DDoS attack. We're also being continuously attacked, and I mean, it's also a good sign. It means that you are really irritating somebody really well.
Well, and something I wanted to touch on as well that you just covered in your presentation of the Global Anti-Scam Alliance is the idea of those registrars and those web hosting and that kind of bulletproof hosts. You guys are partnering with Google to release the Global Signal Exchange in January. So that includes some of that data. You guys are working with the registrars as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure.
And the types of trends that you guys are seeing emerge from that data?
Yeah. I'm going to share my screen again because a picture usually says more than 1,000 words. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit of PowerPoint nerd. I mean, for the record, what the Global Anti-Scam Alliance does is we really try to bring together all the stakeholders. I mean, scams are a global problem, and we can only solve them by bringing together governments, law enforcement, banks, telecom operators, e-commerce platforms to share intelligence on scams, to really network and work together and define better solutions. And that's one of the first solutions we're now launching, indeed, as with foundation partner Google, is a signal exchange. And what we try to achieve with the signal exchange is three things. Of course, the real-time exchange of data. And in this case, we're starting with IP addresses and URLs, but we want to slowly move forward towards crypto, phone numbers, etc. But that's all privacy sensitive. So we are starting with URLs and IP addresses. And we not only facilitate real-time exchange. I mean, Google put in the first 100,000 scammy sites, but we already have connections with 80 other data sources. I mean, Scam Advisors data, APWG for phishing, you name it. We also offer them bespoke analysis because what Gary was already saying is, if you find one or two websites, it's a pretty good chance that those are only the top of the iceberg and there are hundreds or even thousands of domains below it. And in one of our searches, we found one scammer having 10,000 domain names, doing the same trick over and over and over again. And finally, the leaderboards. And so maybe briefly, I mean, this is just an overview of analysis. We can see which brands are being misused the most. And interestingly enough, Facebook is, of course, a platform which is unfortunately misused a lot, but they are also being abused a lot by scammers to get into our accounts, etc. But what I'm proudest of is, and this is just illustrative, and it's officially going live in January 2025, is the leaderboards. Because as Gary was saying, there are many good hosting companies, registries, and registrars which are trying to fight abuse. And in our leaderboard, in our test data, .dk, the Danish domain name, they have 1.3 million domains under management. and 0.03% abuse. And we define abuse broader than the industry because, as Gary was saying, it's not only malware, phishing, it's spam, it's child abuse, it's scams. There's a lot more criminal activity there. But Denmark is doing a pretty good job. And very honestly, the only thing they're doing is if you want to have a Danish domain name, show us your ID. So it's not a huge investment. I mean, most of the mature dating websites, they ask for an ID nowadays. So why can dating sites ask for an ID and a hosting company or registrar cannot? On the other side of the curve, and yes, I'm a little bit chicken, so I marked them until we're ready to go. But they're registrars with registries with 2 million domain names under management and 9% abuse, and that's what we know. So it's probably a lot more. And we will start the conversations with registrars, registries, and hosting companies, showing our data. And I know there's several out there who actually are trying to fight it, but it's not easy. I mean, on scamadvisor.com, which I manage, 50% of all the reviews we're getting in every day are fake and scam, and every day we try to fight them, but they always find new ways. So it's not an easy job, and we want to work together with them to improve and help them get better and not be a platform being used by cyber criminals. Back to you, Maya.
No, absolutely. I think information sharing is paramount, and the fact that you guys are wanting to partner and work together to help remediate the issue is outstanding. And I want to kind of go back to something that was said here of, okay, so the government came up with 3 sites. You and Aid were able to uncover 1,000. We know that scam sites are operating in networks. And then what was mentioned in the previous 2 sessions is that we have a convergence of threat actors partnering together to accomplish those scams, to defraud more and more people. What I wanted to ask you, Gary, is do you think that these groups are associated with certain scam trends, like different regions, different actors, or is it kind of across the board?
No, very similar to what Yuri's map showed us, there are specializations in different places. I've been saying for years that there's a concept of factors that come together to create what we call a cybercrime bloom. You need high-speed internet, you need a strong education system, and you need high unemployment, especially youth unemployment. If those 3 things come together, you're going to have a cybercrime bloom. And so as we've watched crime over the decades, we used to have Russian malware and Romanian phishing. And then phishing moved in a strong way to the Maghreb. Why? All of a sudden, Morocco and Algeria had high-speed internet. They've always had good education systems. Indonesia took over phishing when Indonesia gained high-end or higher speed internet. In Nigeria, one of the key factors was when Shell Oil paid an enormous settlement to the Nigerian government, and they decided to use that to create a scholarship program. And so young Nigerian students were now able to go to college and get a very good quality computer science degree, but you're in a country that has something like a 60% youth unemployment rate. So we started seeing internet crimes first only in internet cafes in Nigeria. Then as Lagos and then later Abuja came up with high-speed internet for home users and for better cell signal networks, we saw the criming rise there. Business email compromise was the #1 crime in the Internet Crime and Complaint Center, the IC3, from 2015 until 2021, and it was all West African. And that's really why we focused for so long studying West African crime. In 2022 and 2023, BEC actually continued to grow, but now we have all of a sudden the crypto investment scams are exceeding BEC. So it's not that BEC stopped. BEC is still going up, but crypto investment scams are doubling in volume every year. And the difference is those scam compounds that Aaron was telling us about earlier. As we started seeing this new model, that really has caused our focus to spend a lot of time on those crypto investment scams just in the US, we had, as Aaron said, $4.5 billion in investment fraud. That's what got reported. Different surveys have put the US losses closer to $28 billion in investment fraud. There was a great survey done by the AARP, which in the US is a program for assisting elderly people. So the more aged people, I'm a member, aged. But they've been spending time doing surveys of their members. And the other thing that happened was FinCEN, which is our financial crimes network, which is a government agency, started looking at the raw data of the suspicious activity reports that they got in. And both of them put that number right around $28 billion, both through survey and through studying the financial records by FinCEN. That bloom is why we're focused so heavily right now on what Aaron calls pig butchering. And yes, I'm one of the people who refuse to call it that. Pig butchering is the Chinese crypto investment scams. And why I don't say it for two reasons. First, it's victim shaming. Are we going to encourage more people to complain by calling them a pig? No. And then second, it's not accurate because many of the crypto investment scams are being run from India and from West Africa, but they use a very different model with a very different approach and a very different timeline. And when we call all of it pig butchering, it makes us believe as an industry that it's all coming from Cambodia, Myanmar, and Thailand. And that's not exactly accurate.
I can get that. I can get that. I will come back at you though, that the branding, the kind of
I understand
attention
why
grab
she does
that
it.
pig butchering gets, like we get attention on the problem. But so
Yeah.
kind of recapping what you guys have just spoken about, if we can identify the jurisdiction of where it's coming from, the web hosting service that it's using, and the area that the most fraud and the most money has been being taken from victims, what are our issues here? Is it an issue of a lack of local enforcement? Is it the people kind of sitting at the head of the helm of payments, like card schemes working with government agencies that are not doing enough to help take back control? This shift it's to me seemingly a shift in power dynamics. Our money is going into the hands of organized crime.
Very honestly, I think there are two sides of the coin. I mean, on the one hand, all the stakeholders have to do more. The hosting companies, the registrars, the banks, the telecom operators, the e-commerce platforms, the big tech companies, and also the consumer. I mean, the consumer also has a responsibility. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is we are still divided in countries, but we have a global economy. And one of my colleagues actually lives in Nigeria, and there has been a huge social discussion in Nigeria social media because parents are sending their children not to school, but to scam school, because then at least you make money. And what the other side of the coin is, what we really need to work on is the inequality. The internet is making us a global world, and if you would be living in Nigeria with Gary as saying 60% unemployment, and you need to feed your kids, then yeah, I mean, where do you think you are going? So I know that's not an easy one, but it's the other side of the coin we also have to look at. And maybe we all need more developers. So maybe we can change the scammers into developers for good. Sorry, Maya, back to you.
Well, I'll follow up with one thing. Why the nonprofit space has to be involved in this is because the tagline we've used with Intelligence for Good, which is the nonprofit that we're using to still train students, still put them on real world problems. But there's a space where we say these crimes have no natural predator. If I'm doing crimes that are impacting the bottom line of Visa or MasterCard or Bank of America or even Facebook, they're going to take action. It's in their corporate interest to take action against these crimes. But whose corporate interest is benefited when grandma loses all of her money to a scammer? when a young couple decides to invest so that they can afford to build a house and all of their money is stolen. There is no corporation who benefits from that. The UK is trying to change that by saying, oh, now it's the bank's fault. That's going to be a disaster. I predict total disaster there. What you've told the criminals now is you don't have to be responsible. And then the other part of that is now the victim says, oh, I can take a chance. It might be a scam, but the bank's just going to give me all my money back. But who is going to help that person whose crime does not have an impact on the corporate world? And what we're hoping is, as I'm sure yours is as well, is if corporations want to make a difference in this space, can they support some of these nonprofit efforts that will help us help the victims who don't have anyone to speak for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Because right now, as you said, there's not really a comprehensive way for victims to get help, and thankfully to the organization, your organization is what Aaron West is doing with Shamrock. Hopefully we can help give them a voice, but shifting the light a little bit to maybe something a little bit brighter though, can you share maybe like a success story of how you guys were able to aid victims, or an industry win that we can share with our audience?
Gary?
There are very few. There just are very few. The thing that right now I'm taking comfort in is that as we're talking to victims, a lot of them, the reason they're now talking to us is because they tried to do a crypto transaction and it got blocked. And the reason it got blocked is our team and others like us are recording these crypto addresses and sending them to our partners so that they will be aware that this is a crypto address that's associated with a scam. So when someone tries to send their Coinbase or crypto.com or whatever money to that scammer, it gets blocked and said, this is being blocked because of a scam. That's the best I can do right now. But I have many occasions where the victim doesn't lose all of their money because at some point, one of the addresses that we tagged as scam got picked up by the people they were using to try to send the money, and a light bulb went on and said, oh, maybe this really is something I shouldn't be involved in. That's the best stories I've got on that side of it. I have a lot more horrible stories.
Disruption is
we have to count
disruption.
the little victories. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm slightly more positive than Gary, but we are only at the beginning of fighting scams. I agree with Gary that what the UK legislatively is doing is, I have mixed feelings as well. But the good news is that, I mean, the banks are starting to do things. I do see a change. I do see companies, the big tech companies, telecom operators, they are starting to take more responsibility and are starting to share more data within the industry. It depends very much per country. But the Signal Exchange is a good example. I've been trying that for 4 years, and since the last year, things started to change, and I got approached by several big tech companies. Hey, we can no longer fight this alone. We need to work together. So I am positive about the future, but I always compare it with the virus industry. I mean, in the 90s, there was panic. I mean, viruses were out of control. It's still there and it will always be, but we are somewhat more in control. And I think the same will happen with scams, that in the next 5 to 10 years, we will get this more under control, but it will always be there.
Hey, Aileen, how's it going? Well, on that note, I wanted to kind of wrap up our session a little bit. And while we are moving towards the path of disruption and working together and more comprehensively in sharing data, is there any particular giveaway or leave-away you would like to have the audience know today?
Gary?
I think I may have shared I just think it's important that we follow the model that Erin is leading with. If there's a leader in the crypto scam space, it's Erin West. And what she's doing there with educate, seize, disrupt, all of this, what we're doing right now is educating, but I admire so much her ability to get it out to the public. But take these stories that we're telling here and go tell them to your neighbors, tell them to your friends, tell them to your elders in your life. And because a lot of this is still hiding behind shame and ignorance. And the best thing we can do is raise awareness on these issues. So that would be my takeaway, is help us spread this message.
Definitely agree with Gary. I think what's really crucial is to support the different initiatives. So for my initiative with the Global Signal Change, please share all your phishing scam sites with us, because it really helps us to start a dialogue with the hosting companies, with the registrars, and help them clean up. You can help with money, with data, with manpower. Please join.
And I really want to thank both of you for participating in our Safer E-commerce Day, because part of our effort is to help spread that awareness and learning and taking back that kind of shame surrounded by being scammed or being part of a financial crime. So your work and your participation is really meaningful.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Maya. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Absolutely.
And Yori, I'll be starting to send you some data.
Fantastic. Thank you. Have a very nice continuation of your event. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
Yori and Gary and Maya, for your insights. And be sure to catch our next session, where we're going to be going over the latest trends in marketplace risk so that you can be prepared to meet and defeat these challenges we're talking about on the platforms where fraudsters are finding their victims. We're going to have a few minutes break, and we will see you in 5. Join the next session. Also, we have some resources coming in from Gary, so stay tuned for that. We'll be sharing those as well. See you all in a bit.
Bye-bye.